The opinions you hear on Your Mountain from individual hosts or guests do not necessarily represent those of Your Mountain, our sponsors, or other entities we're affiliated with professionally or otherwise. You've waited long enough. Go listen to the show.
There are millions of acres of opportunity out there. They belong to you. Every day, decisions are being made that affect your land, your water, your wildlife. You should know about them. This is Your Mountain. Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Your Mountain Podcast. I'm your host, David Wilms, and I'm going to let my co-host here finish sipping his drink before I introduced one Nephi Cole.
Hello, Dave.
Hey, Nephi.
This is it's literally very much like Groundhog Day.
It is.
I feel as if I've been here before.
It's almost like you have, talking about
the
almost the
same
same thing. And for our listeners, here's the deal. There's a reason why we normally put out a podcast on Tuesday. And you woke up Tuesday if you're a subscriber, which you should be, by the way. If you're not a subscriber, go to wherever you get your podcasts and hit that subscribe button.
And go pick up your wife's phone and subscribe her too.
That's right. And your kids and whatever you need to do. Just subscribe everybody. Tell your friends. You'll really get the word out, spread the word on this podcast, and have everybody subscribe. And we want to see a huge boost next week in the number of subscribers to this podcast. That'd be awesome. But I digress.
At least 10.
Right. But I digress.
Okay.
We actually sat down and recorded this long podcast that we were going to release on Tuesday. And it was going to be about some of the early actions the Biden administration was taking with respect to some natural resource issues. And we were diving into it and saying, hold your horses here a little bit. Let's wait and see. We don't know what's going to happen. Let's not overreact. We'll get back to you.
Don't overreact. It's not a big deal.
Not a big deal. We'll get back to you.
Really do this.
We'll get back to you if it's a big deal.
It was very much like the William Perry Penley thing. Remember? Because William Perry Penley, we told everybody that it was only he's going to be here for 2 months and then he'll be gone. And we were so wrong.
We missed that. He's probably still there. We just don't know about it. He's probably embedded somewhere in No, I know he sent his email to his staff on his last day there. Just teasing a little bit. But, so we recorded this long podcast and then we caught wind that the Biden administration was going to be releasing or signing an executive order addressing the exact thing we were talking about on the podcast. So we would release it and then it would immediately be an irrelevant podcast and we get all these emails.
We would have been wrong. If there's one thing that we can't take,
we don't want to be wrong.
It's being
all
wrong
the time.
Yeah.
So we pushed, and I'm going to use a pun here. We pushed the pause button. And you see where I'm going with that?
No.
We pushed the pause button on releasing that episode. We did not release it. And we're re-recording it today because there is some big news that has come out of the Biden administration.
Just let me say before we get started, it is really unique to, this kind of took me aback of, the discussions about, nobody's going to do that much controversial stuff. Don't worry about it. We're all getting along, but boy, I don't know if we want to talk about it first or not, but it's kind of controversial.
It is controversial, but I want to talk about it. And I think we should break it down because I think in some ways it's still more controversial right now than it needs to be. So let's talk about what happened. There are a couple of things that happened today, actually. We don't need to talk about all of them, but let's touch on 2 of the executive orders or parts of the executive orders that were signed today by the president. Right?
Yep.
One of them we've talked about on a prior episode, which was we had a 30 by 30 episode where we talked about this conserving and restoring 30% of our lands and wildlife or lands and waters by 2030, right? To address the global wildlife crisis we're seeing. Right? We had a whole episode on that. Go back and listen to that. One of the executive orders today was to direct agencies to develop a plan or strategy and to have those agencies reach out to a broad array of stakeholders, landowners and industry and NGOs and others, non-government organizations and others, to have this conversation about, okay,
what does it mean?
What does it mean? How can we do it? What does doing it look like? Right, to develop a strategy. I actually thought I appreciated that part of that executive order, right? That there was a focus on really reaching out and having an across the table dialogue with as many stakeholders as possible to move this policy idea that the administration wants to take, right? This idea of how do we stem the downward trend of, like, how do we stop the downward trend of wildlife in this country, and how do we restore landscapes and habitats for wildlife and for the people that use those landscapes and for outdoor recreationists and others? Like, how do we address that? And I liked that approach of saying, I'm going to task my agencies with figuring out a way to do this, but their responsibility is going to be to gather information and work collaboratively with people from all over the country and all different walks of life and interests to try and develop this roadmap. And you and I have talked about this before. That's kind of the way our old boss would do business.
Yeah, that's the way you need to do it. If you're gonna, it really is the right way to do business.
And so now I don't know if you have anything to add on that, but I found it interesting that you have that, and then it's juxtaposed with this.
I was going to wait before I piled onto that, but yes, I think that's the right way to do business. So let's say that you had something controversial that you were proposing. If you actually want to do something that a lot of people are going to, people may have concerns with, may have problems with, the way to do it in a way that doesn't make everybody want to light the world on fire is to have those long form discussions. It's to sit people down at the table and say, hey, we may not all agree, but let's talk about what we do agree on and what we don't agree on. The principle being that most people, reasonable people, are going to find that they actually agree about more stuff than they disagree about. There's nuance and there's things where we're going to maybe go the opposite direction, but people can generally get along if they'll have robust and respectful conversations. Where you run into problems are when people feel like they're getting told what to do, where they're getting something shoved down their throats. Typically, it's none of us as individuals are different. It's very easy for us to sign on to our own plan. It's very easy for us to support something that we had ownership in developing and making.
Yeah, you got some skin in the game, right?
Yeah. It's very easy to be angry when somebody shows up on your front door and says, hey, you know what? I'm going to tell you how to live.
What's that old line, the Reagan line? From the government, we're here to help.
We're here to help, yep.
Yeah, that sometimes isn't a well-received line in parts of this country.
So yeah, our last podcast that we did roughly 2 days ago or something. You mean
the one that we did not ever release?
Yeah, the one that you all will never hear was talking about an action from the Biden administration. It was a leasing moratorium on public lands of 60 days so that they could go and take a look at the program. And we spent a lot of time opining about how everybody was going to be very angry about this, but don't worry, it's not that big of a deal because there's federal law that requires quarterly lease sales, and we're going to see something happen this quarter anyway. It's window dressing. Boy, were we wrong.
Maybe. So maybe. And that's where I'm still sitting, is the huge maybe.
So what happened?
Okay, so the original thing that happened is, I believe it was the acting Secretary of Interior issued a secretarial order putting a stop on a 60-day stop on leasing on public lands and drilling, issuing new drilling permits on public lands. What happened today is the president said, I'm going to put I think they called it a pause. We're going to put a pause on all leasing, oil and gas leasing only. That's the other thing to note. This doesn't involve coal or anything else. This was related to oil and gas only. So a pause on leasing of oil and gas, or for leasing lands for oil and gas potential development on public lands with no end date. So there's no end date on it. And we can talk about the legal piece of that. Like, is there a strategic legal reason why it's not 1 year or 2 years or 6 months or 60 days, and why it's this, we're just doing a pause. And the information that they put out, to talk about, and I've got it in front of me, so you'll have to excuse me as I thumb through it just a little bit. But they provided a little bit of information. So they're pausing new oil and gas leasing on public lands and offshore waters to do a comprehensive review of the federal oil and gas program. That's the objective here, to do a comprehensive review of the federal oil and gas program. So that's the news that hit today.
Well, I'll tell you my first thought on that. Do you care?
No, go ahead. I've got a ton of thoughts, so you go ahead.
First I would say, the moratorium to do a comprehensive review. I'm not sure if your goal is really to do a review of a program that you actually have to stop, all action in the program until you complete your review. And so that's my first response to that. And then I would say, boy, it's pretty bold action in my mind, and it looks bad. I mean, for any discussion of a 60-day moratorium and having people get mad about that, if they were mad about that, you could have said, like, keep your ammunition in your belt or whatever. It's all good. This to me it seems to be a bridge too far to me.
So I'll play the devil's advocate role.
Okay.
Right. So maybe we'll role play this thing out.
Okay.
To try and present.
Can I throw things at you?
No, we're just role playing. That doesn't involve physical beatings. Well, but let's play this out and try and provide multiple perspectives on this, sort of where everybody's coming from. So the Biden administration issues what they're calling a pause on oil and gas leasing. First of all, it is worth noting that there are still somewhere in the neighborhood of 26 or 27, there are over 26 million acres of public lands that are currently under lease right now to the oil and gas industry.
How many million?
Over 26 million.
Yeah. So there's 26 million already ready to go.
There's 26 million that have been leased, that are under leased right now.
And this does not affect those 26 million.
It does not. And almost 14 million of those acres right now have not been used. They're not producing anything. So think of it as roughly almost a 50-50. Just over 50% has not been developed yet. About 50% has some level of development of those leases on them right now.
Yep.
That's onshore. Because remember, this affects onshore and offshore. Yeah. Offshore, there are more than 12 million acres of public waters that are currently under lease right now. And 9.3, over 3/4 of those 12 million are not producing. They haven't been, no drilling, no production on those yet. The other thing, this doesn't, so there's the acres leased. This doesn't affect the acres leased. The other thing is it does not affect, if there's a company out there and they already have a permit to drill, this doesn't affect existing valid permits to drill. Right now, onshore and offshore combined, there are roughly 7,700 unused approved permits to drill out there, right?
7,700.
About 7,700. So the point being, and several thousand of those, I don't know how many thousand, I don't know the breakup, several thousand of those are on public lands, and a number, a lot of them are in public waters as well. There have been a number of companies have done interviews with the press recently saying, in fact, there was a big push to approve a lot of permits towards the end of the last administration. And there are a number of companies that said, we have enough acres under lease, and we have enough permits already issued to drill for the next 4 years.
Yeah.
Without it upsetting operations.
I was hoping I was going to get to make that point, so I'd sound much smarter. Because absolutely. I mean, that's the thing that people don't want to talk about is, yes, there's this pause to look at everything. But this pause, for those of folks that are getting very excited that, they'll never see another drill rig out there on public lands, know this, you will. and they're going to be drilling at the same rate that they were drilling, for at least the next 4 years. And for those folks who were upset about that same issue, that they thought that there wasn't going to be any activity, know this: if you like that, there will be activity for the next 4 years. So this is affecting you in out years. It's affecting those companies in future years, not necessarily in the very near term.
That's correct. So you have to put on, you have to get into your DeLorean and set it for 2025, right? And hit 88 miles per hour, and leave your don't mess up the space-time continuum while you're doing this.
Absolutely.
But when you're going back to the future of 2025, that's where you're going to start seeing these potential ramifications, depending on what the administration decides to do at the end of this pause. Like, what changes are they trying to, or will they make to the leasing program?
You say what they're going to decide to do, but everybody also needs to be aware they don't just get to do whatever they want. This isn't like the administration, gets to, they can sit around for a while and have a cup of tea and say, hey, what we should do? Let's make it permanent. Nobody gets to develop anything ever. That's not the case. They don't get to do that all by themselves.
Right. And why is that?
Because there are laws, federal laws, that require them to take actions by specific dates.
There's the Mineral Leasing Act, right? Yeah. So the Mineral Leasing Act requires lease sales be held quarterly, for example.
Which brings up the interesting question that we talked about before. So how do they avoid that? Are they just planning on hey, we're going to be in litigation starting this quarter? Because saying that we're indefinitely not going to worry about it, I think this was somewhat, some legal strategery here, which is saying if we don't tell them that it's going to be longer than 3 months, that it's going to be a year or 2 years, whatever, well, then it makes it harder for them to sue us for an arbitrary date that we're doing this for. So let's just leave it open-ended. But at the same time, once you pass that first quarter and you haven't done anything, somebody's going to jump on you.
Yeah, I think that's probably right. Although you can look back to, the Obama administration put a moratorium on the leasing of coal. Mm-hmm. And that moratorium, I can't remember how long that actually lasted. And I don't even have the court case in front of me here. So I'm this is a little bit of a stretch. I'm trying to pull from the memory bank. Mm-hmm. But I seem to recollect that the court said there's no problem with the administration pausing something for a short period of time or a reasonable period of time to assess the way in which they're implementing the program. That it stands to reason as a new administration comes in or new science is available, new data becomes available, whatever it happens to be, that it makes sense to take a hard look at the way you're operating the program periodically and update it. But the question is, what's a reasonable amount of time? And if you have a moratorium or a pause that lasts too long, it might be viewed as unreasonable. But then you also have to remember, think about this. Let's say 6 months is a reasonable period of time. Okay. Well, what if they decide to make it a year? Well, what's going to happen in the interim? Well, they're going to get sued. How long does a lawsuit take to play out through court? And
that's going to take a couple of years.
Couple of years, right? And so you could, an administration, and I'm not saying that this is what's going to happen. I'm saying
this is absolutely what's going to happen.
I'm not saying this is what's going to happen.
I am saying this is what's going to happen.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I'm not. I'm just putting out information
on
what could happen.
Because I like to be right. I'm predicting that what you're going to say is that this is a tactic to draw it out as long as possible, knowing that they don't have the horses, the legislative horses, to make the changes they want to make. This is a way to make that moratorium as long as possible. You put an open end on it, you wait for the lawsuit to come as long as possible, and then you just consign yourself to fighting it in court for as long as you can.
And maybe I wouldn't even go quite that far as saying fighting it in court as long as possible. You have the ability to moot out the court case by issuing your new guidance documents and starting to lease under the program again, and then you potentially moot that lawsuit anyway. So like if I was really thinking, how do you use the policy and the legal system to your greatest advantage, it would be to issue a pause like this and then wait until somebody sues and then wait for the lawsuit to get far enough. You're going to lose the lawsuit at the end of the day if your pause is too long. And so you just let it run its course for as long as you're going to let it run its course, and then you issue your new guidance and then file a motion to moot the case out. Because there's no longer a justiciable issue because you're now issuing leases again.
There are quite a few people who are already, I know, who are in the middle of the road, like fence sitters on the new administration, saying, hey, look, I'm ready for a new non-divisive government that wants to work with each other, who literally these 30 plus executive actions have absolutely turned them off. Just the scale of them. And they're just like, and literally are saying, people who I know voted for Biden and are literally saying, I was wrong. And that takes a lot. If you think about that, like what they were mad at before, for them to say, you know what, I was wrong. Boy, that's saying something about the angst that they feel at this moment. Will they feel that way in a couple of years?
But I'd also
6 months? I don't know.
To play devil's advocate, though.
Go ahead.
Did they miss the campaign trail? Were they not hearing what Biden was saying he's doing exactly what he said he was going to do on day one. Like he said, on my first day or within a certain period of time, I'm going to do this.
But you know what
He's doing exactly what he said he was going to do. And I'm
talking about mostly Republicans that I had talked to, which is what they said is it's not like if somebody is a Democrat and voted for Biden that they're, they got all of it. They got all of it. But in this election, you had a unique thing happen. In this election, you had a whole lot of people. If so, again, let's recap what happened in this election. What happened in this election is you actually had voters come out, and Republicans won more seats in Congress than they were supposed to. There was prediction that they were going to lose the Senate. They kind of did. They kind of didn't. I mean, it's a 50-50 split. It's as tight as they could have without winning. And I would argue it's not their fault. I would argue. And you'd agree with me.
I would agree with you.
And so they did better than they thought they would. They won. They hold more state houses. They picked some up. They won more governorships. So across the political spectrum, they won everywhere except in one spot. This election, some would argue, was less for a lot of those people in the middle of America. Not those people, we're a 4-party system, and I can talk about that in a second. But a lot of those people in the center, people weren't necessarily voting for someone as much as some people were voting against the feeling that they were having, against the conflict and just a distaste for the way politics was being played in America. And so they were saying, I'm going to go with an elder statesman who I think is going to quit.
That's elder statesman.
Well, I mean, it's pretty accurate.
No, I know. I just think it's...
But that was a lot
underselling how old he really is.
Yeah, but a lot of people said that. And now those same people, like this will be the fascinating thing to watch, is how many people, is there overreach in the new administration that drives too far in the direction of believing that they had a mandate when they didn't, when the mandate wasn't so much about policies, but more about personalities. And so we're going to wait and see that all play out. But America, America's really basically a 5-party system, if you will. There's a group right in the center that's 20% of America that they're independent, they would say, or whatever. They'll go back and forth all the time. On the other wings, roughly split them in half. And you have hard right, hard left, middle right, middle left. The people we've all been listening to have these fights are the hard right and the hard left. They're the progressive party, and they're the Trumpublicans. And these are the people that fight the most vocally. Most of America isn't there. And most of America is pragmatic decision makers that want to see stuff get done and doesn't relish the fight more than they relish everything else. And not saying that the folks on the other sides, kind of the further left and further right, don't also have great passion. for our country and everything. But there's just a difference in what they're willing to put up with. They don't want to see an end to the filibuster. They don't want to see, politics wins at all costs. And so, that's what majority of America is. The majority of America isn't into confrontational politics. They're just being carried away by it.
Yeah. Well, to pull us back a little bit, and I agree with exactly what you've said, because I agree with that, which is why I'm going to say, despite the lukewarm reception this executive order received by some, that's maybe as generous as I can be, calling it lukewarm. There's some flame throwing going on, right? I'm still in the let's wait and see what happens with this camp, for these reasons. So one, as we've already mentioned, there are millions of acres of land currently under lease. There are thousands of permits to drill that have been issued. Oh, and by the way, this order doesn't actually stop permitting for drilling. So companies can still go through the process to try and seek permits. I would suspect that process will take more than the 40 days it was taking under the prior administration to get those permits, but they can still go through that process. So the point being, in a lot of ways, it will, for the immediate in the short term at least, it will be largely business as usual, with the exception of there not being these quarterly lease sales until they come up with how they're going to address it. So the piece I'd say of where I'm still going to reserve judgment, and then I'll get to the but here, still going to reserve judgment, because we don't know what that's going to look like yet, and we don't know the process they're going to undertake, and if maybe they will be more big tent with getting ideas on how to address what they'd like to see at the end of this moratorium or pause or whatever we want to call it. Maybe they will take that approach. That's sort of a wait and see. Are there going to be short-term economic? Will there be short-term economic impact on some states by this decision to not have leases? The answer is
short term.
The answer is yes. How big will they be? I don't know the answer to that. The way that the leasing program works is lands are leased and the revenue generated is split roughly 50-50 between the federal government and the states. So in states like Wyoming, Colorado, and New Mexico, which are the three highest public land leasing states in the country, that can be a real source of income. I think 2 years ago, Wyoming, for example, received over $50 million in revenue from lease sales that year. Last year, it was way less than that. There were just not nearly as many acres leased because, as we know, there were a lot of factors impacting it, but the oil and gas industry was depressed as a whole nationwide, and so there was not nearly as much interest in leasing. So it will have, whether it's $50 million for a state like Wyoming or $10 million, it's going to have an impact depending on how long this goes. Each quarterly lease sale that doesn't occur means those dollars that would have been generated from leasing those lands, that 50% is not going to the state. The other 50% is not going to the treasury, right? So there are no ifs, ands, or buts. There are some economic consequences. I think they've been blown out of proportion, however. I've seen some people say this moratorium will cost up to 1 million jobs. Like, are you kidding me? There was a tweet today from a senator who will remain nameless that said it would cost upwards of 1 million jobs. Like, ooh, I'm not sure I buy that. But
I bet I can make the numbers work.
I'd like to see you try. But I guess my point is, and I guess I would push and I'd say, okay, recognizing that there are going to be economic consequences on these states that have federal lands that are no longer able to have these lease sales for an indeterminate amount of time, to the extent that the Biden administration can push Congress to provide direct payments back to the states to compensate them for those losses, because it's a direct result of a policy they're implementing right now, I think that conversation makes sense to have. I would fully support the administration having a conversation with Congress about pushing some direct payments out to the affected states and tribes, although I don't know if tribes are going to be affected by this or not.
I have general issues with that.
Of direct payments to states?
Yeah, well, here's my biggest concern. I think that we're in a fiscal climate. So first of all, I'll say this, and I think we ignore it sometimes. In the United States of America, we're very blessed to be able to have the luxury of conservation. So conservation, environmentalism, is a luxury. It is something that we get to do because we have so much excess in the United States of America.
I was thinking about that yesterday.
If you don't believe me, people, go to Brazil. Or even better, go to some place that's, not even as good as Brazil. Go to Bolivia. Go to
Sub-Saharan Africa.
Sub-Saharan Africa, where, people, and see how they are extracting oil there. And what you'll note is, the reason that we can have agencies that we pay to sit around and put together reclamation plans and write regulations and those types of things, because we have so much disposable income in our country that we can afford to pay for the privilege of conservation, because we don't have to choose between food and environment. Those are things that we can have both of. We don't, we're not worried about whether our kids are going to have medicine. That's not the case in the entirety of the world. In fact, we are very unique. We're probably the most blessed people on earth with being able to care about these things, because
Canadians are right up there too.
Yeah, but they're basically us. They're basically a territory. And so,
ouch, Nephi. Ouch. Just punching our brethren in the stomach. That's what was it? The Simpsons? Wasn't there a Simpsons episode where, because there's a Simpsons episode for everything, where Homer referred to him as America Junior?
America Junior.
I don't. I've been to Canada. Canada's awesome. Been there several times.
Yeah. Anyway, so back to the actual honest subject.
You're going to get a bunch of hate mail now.
From Canada? How many people can there possibly be?
Well, plus, nobody in Canada hates anybody. They're all the nicest people in the world.
Look, there's 10 people that live up there and like a million Molsons. And Molsons can't write. So, as we going back to the subject.
I don't have any words. You're going to have to issue a full apology.
To Canada? Canada should have to apologize to me. I don't even know where I'm going with this.
No, you're going down this rabbit hole and you're digging a deeper and deeper hole.
Doing a presentation that I had to give today.
Man, I think Canada is awesome.
They are. And they're lucky, like the United States of America, to have a huge amount of disposable income that they can spend on conservation
They're
issues.
going to have a little less because we stopped the Keystone Pipeline. But
that's right. Well, here's what happens. When economies become depressed, people start to care less about the environment.
Right.
And that's a reality here, too. And when you have goods like this, when you have services where you're asking the federal government to pay a state to produce nothing, it sounds great in theory. And a lot of people run this theory on a lot of stuff. They say, hey, you know what we should invent money. We should get a lot more federal money for Project A and Project B and for this access project and for this wildlife project. But very few people go, where are we going to get the money from? Very few people look back and realize that at some point, the deficit spending that our country is undertaking right now, the massive deficits, like that money just, it actually does come from somewhere, whether it's from future earnings that you're projecting or from current taxes or from mineral revenues. It has to come from somewhere.
Look, it's a big Ponzi scheme that is going to come home to roost probably with our grandkids. So I'm going to write them a big thank you note now.
No, China's going to get mad. Sooner or later, China's going to want their money back. That's all I'm saying. And so I think we should quit spending money on. I think if states.
But we're getting down to.
Yeah, I think if
getting
states
off track a bit here.
Well, I think if states on things like these issues, these mineral issues, and I think this is a difficult part for people who are environmentally and conservation minded, and I am one of those people, even though people don't believe it. At some point, you have to say, okay, how are we going to pay for it, and what trade-offs are we willing to make? And that's why conscientious development in the right way, where you're saying, yes, we're going to have reclamation, mitigation, we're going to have avoidance, but we are going to still utilize our resources to create jobs and to create goods and services to be sold. You have to have that approach. You cannot have approach of believing that I get to live in an urban community and my electricity comes from a plug in the wall, my light from a plug in the wall, and my food comes from the grocery store or my fridge. We can't have that attitude. My gas comes from, the Maverick, where I buy gas and lotto tickets, by the way, because they're awesome. But that's the issue. And I think that's what, this explanation you made, I think that a lot of people, unfortunately, they say, yeah, let's do a moratorium. Let's not even drill. Let's not do this stuff. And then we'll where's the money going to come from that those states need to open schools and to build roads and to deliver vaccines? And, where's that money going to come from? They're like, oh, we'll just write a check from the federal government. We'll write another check.
Yeah, no, I want to be clear what I'm suggesting here. What we're talking about are two different, short-term versus long-term, right? And I guess what I was saying is, in the short term, if the administration is going to do a systematic review of a program, and those states, there are states that generate revenue from that program that cannot do it because of a direct action of the federal government, that for the short term that this systematic review is going on, the federal government should figure out a way to make the states whole during that process. Once that process is over, it's a different conversation. So I'm not talking about a continuing subsidy or something like that, or a perpetual payment to every citizen or to every state. Right? I'm talking about because of a direct action of the federal government impacting the revenue stream of the state government, that the federal government should figure out a way to make them whole in the short term while they're undergoing that systematic review. And then on the back end, then it's a different conversation.
Well, and that's why, unfortunately, the lawsuit's going to happen because
I agree with you. The lawsuit's going to happen.
Because looking at strategy, if your strategy is to, if your goal is, you may not like carbon fuels. Every time you can slow something down like this, you're putting people out of business. You're changing the sector, you're changing jobs, you're changing economic development calculus, because what you're doing is every time I make it harder for you, if you are working in the oil and gas world, every time I make it harder for you to live in that world and with that business, to get money from banks, to be able to have a line of credit, the harder I make it for you, the more likely it is I'm going to drive you to do something else and people to do something else. I'm going to make your life more expensive. I'm going to make your work less profitable. And it is a way of shifting demand.
Right.
And that's exactly what we saw with other fuels like coal.
Yeah. Well, not just fuel. I mean, it's look over human history. Well, I mean, over human history, it happens time and time again. You don't go out and buy a lot of typewriters anymore. You don't go out and buy a lot of wagon wheels anymore.
Yeah, but government didn't make that decision that we were going to switch from typewriters. And that's the difference.
They contributed, right? I mean,
I'd love to know. I'm waiting for this.
No,
I'm going to hold on.
No.
I write this down. I'm going to make some money off this.
No,
somehow I'm going to be able to.
For the automobile, though, for sure, the government contributed, right, to the pivot away from carriages to automobiles. I mean, it absolutely contributed in that way. Helped build interstate systems and highways all over the country and facilitated the switch.
There's a difference. I'll be happy to go into it.
No, I don't know if we need to or not. I'm just saying there are examples of
there are carrots and sticks
happening.
And I think that the difference is, I would argue that in some of these cases that you're just bringing up about these great changes that we've just made, These haven't been sticks that have been used to get us to make changes. They've been carrots. So
That's fair.
Government creates an opportunity. If you want people to switch to wind energy, or if you want people to switch to, riding, magic carpets instead of driving cars, well, then what you do is you create incentives that make it easier to own a magic carpet, easier to ride a magic carpet. And then, people are going to move that way if they can, if it makes sense for them.
Right.
You're allowing them to make that choice. When you create disincentives, so basically you have a vision, a policy vision, if it's not driven by what's economically necessarily best for it, but by some other motivating factor, and you think that the way to implement that is through punitive action by creating obstacles to banking, obstacles to credit. How's that just? Obstacles to, by...
The government didn't do that.
When was the last time you heard about somebody being able to fund a coal-fired power plant? When was it? I mean, literally, this happens, and it has happened in previous administrations where people have utilized guidance to the banking system in order to take away the ability of lawful businesses to access credit. And it's happened in the energy world, and it's happened in the commercial world, and you know that I work in that commercial world.
Okay. So I think we're getting way off topic.
Okay. We can get back.
We're getting way off topic.
I'm just saying that it's fine if you have a policy directive to, I'm all about creating carrots. I do have a problem with
isn't one of the carrots,
sticks.
But isn't one of, and devil's advocate again, isn't one of the carrots that an administration might be looking at here is how do you level the playing field to facilitate other energy economies? Because one of the other things is one of the most incentivized, or one of the most incentivized industries right now in the country is the oil and gas industry.
How so? Explain.
Well, you can look at let's just keep it very simple, and I'll just give you this example, right?
Your dog smells bad.
If only it were my dog.
It's my dog.
So look at the Mineral Leasing Act and what it does and how it was set up 100 years ago and how it hasn't been modernized in 100 years and how it's set up to make it as inexpensive as possible to access our federal lands. Things like the royalty rate on federal lands is something like 5 to 10% lower than on state lands and on private lands. So the royalty, we've made it, you don't have to pay as much in. The lease rate can be as low as $1.50 an acre, which means per acre, the state gets about 75 cents an acre on that investment, right? There are incentives built in to facilitate a certain type of development, right? And all I'm saying is that's one of the things that the administration is going to be looking at is the way that we incentivize development the right way?
Fair question. I'm going to fire back with another one though.
Uh-huh.
So, why, when given the opportunity, if it's so much cheaper to develop on federal lands, why will they choose to pay more to develop on private? Yeah, because that happens
and you're right,
every time.
Well, and you're right because you can do it faster, right? Because you don't have the environmental, some of the regulatory requirements that you have to go through from like the National Environmental Policy Act.
Well, that doesn't. So explain that, because I think that's critical, or maybe you want me to explain it. Because
it's the investment in doing the analysis, right? In order to get to the point where you can have a permitted activity. The difference, though, in all things being equal, right? If a wind developer wants to develop on public land versus private land, a wind developer has to do a NEPA review just like an oil and gas developer does. They have to go through the Historic Preservation, National Historic Preservation Act, just like an oil and gas. All the environmental laws that apply to oil and gas also apply to wind. One place that's different are, for example, the royalty rates, the leasing rates, that kind of thing. Like there are differences between the industries, even though they're treated differently on federal lands, and on private lands, they're treated however the private landowner wants to work with that industry, right?
So here is the point that I was trying to make when I came back there, and I think this is the challenge. And we faced it with the coal moratorium, and this is the challenge that's going to be faced on the use of on oil and gas as well. Is that there is going to be an argument from the federal side, most certainly, that people are going to say, well, just like you did, you're going to say, well, they pay 5 times more royalty or whatever it was on private lands. So therefore, they should pay as much on federal lands. They have to pay as much. And if they don't want to pay that much, then they don't get the lease. Here's the problem with that. It doesn't work. It doesn't work because there's a value that it cannot be captured in the dollar value of what is it worth to be able to get in there and get to work and work on those private lands and begin to make profit versus the years that you're going to have to deal with stuff on the federal lands. So even though we are not seeing that in dollar value, it doesn't work to say we're going to pay, the X amount of dollars per acre and the same X amount of dollars on federal, and that's going to be fair because the cost of doing business on the federal lands is significantly higher. It's 5 times higher. And that's why... Well,
don't say 5 times higher.
It's whatever the number
it's higher.
is. It's whatever the number is.
It's not necessarily whatever, but it is higher.
It is very close. You know why? How you can tell it's very close? Because companies are competing against each other for that lease. Multiple companies are looking at the dollar value there. And those companies can do math. And those companies are going, okay, what's it actually going to cost us 5 years out or 6 years or whatever when we actually get our permit and we jump through all these hoops? They have to make that decision on investment. So the thing that's driving the cost of these, and this is why it's a cautionary tale. A lot of times, this is, again, happened in the pre-Trump administration. They came and said we should charge X amount of money for coal leases, and what they're not saying is that if they charge that much, they will never be leased because no one will ever be able to make a living off of that. They will only do business on private because, again, the market drives what people pay for these leases, and there has to be an understanding and acknowledgement of that. You can't just say, well, I think it's worth this much more.
So I think you're half right.
Okay, well,
I think
you're half.
So I think you're right that the market drives the price for the leases, right? And probably the royalty rates that are expected to be paid and the amount they expect to produce, right? They may not even know what they're expected to produce, but the market certainly drives based on the likelihood of productivity. The market drives the lease payment for that part, but there are, remember how I told you earlier that there are something like 12 million acres under lease that have not been developed right now? So 11 of those 12 million onshore acres were leased in what's called a non-competitive bid process, which basically means they went out for bid
and
no company bid on them. And so for the next 2 years, they're still available for anybody to come in. Anybody is using the term loosely, but a company that says we intend to drill or explore or whatever, come in and buy those leases for $1.50 an acre. You know how many of those? It's 11 million of the 12 million acres were sold that way. You know how many of those 11 million acres you would expect to be developed?
How many, Dave?
Less than 3%.
You know what, Dave? You just made my point.
No, but the point I'm making is there are 2 conversations that have to happen here, right? One conversation is about how we deal with high value, high priority lands that are that have high oil or gas potential, and how the bidding process might work on those and what the fair market value should be for those. The other conversation is, should we even be leasing land for oil and gas development that, by the way, the companies that buy them are not the companies, these reputable companies that are good. They're speculators that want to sit on these leases and then try and sell them. They don't develop them. They want to sell them. They want to stack their books. They want to do whatever. Should we even be leasing those, or should we potentially, when we're thinking about multiple use mandates on federal lands, should we be saying, maybe these are places that there's a higher value or a potential higher return on our investment to think about managing these lands in a different way. And so I'm saying that's what I hope, if as I'm looking at this, if they're really having a serious conversation about this program, those are the types of conversations, and the conversations you and I just had, right? We picked sides here and we make this argument, but the argument we had or the discussion we had is what I'm hoping is the discussion that the administration is going to have, that they're going to pull in a lot of viewpoints, circling all the way back to the beginning of our discussion, right? They're going to bring in a lot of viewpoints and hash out these different issues and hear the economics and the potential consequences of doing this, and how we fit this into how we build a future for the leasing program that meets some of the policy objectives of the administration, but at the same time doesn't undercut states and local economies that depend on these businesses in a way that we have a bunch of ghost towns around the West. And so I'm hoping that the type of civil discussion that we're having and throwing information out, that's why I'm saying I'm reserving judgment. I'm not going to judge yet. And my hope is that they do what they're saying they're going to do with this 30 by 30 discussion. And they're going to include a big tent discussion about the future of the leasing program.
I agree. And I think what would be very exciting above and beyond that is, again, when you talked about these areas that are leased for speculative reasons, that are probably never going to be developed, it'll be very interesting to see if the other interests involved, and there's been this discussion has happened in other natural resource multiple use parts, where we've said, what if the administration is willing to let people, if they don't want to see it developed, is willing to let them bid, is willing to let them, basically
a conservation bid.
Yeah, I think it's worth talking about. I think it's valid, and I think it's fair. There's a lot of people that don't want to see it because they worry that they'd be outbid for it. But how else do you establish the value of that thing if you're not willing to let people who value, for whatever you value it for, if you can't, I want to develop it. Well, if it's worth more money for you as an individual to see me not develop it, what's the issue? I mean, and I can make the argument of there being an issue, but at the same time, I think that's fair to start having that discussion more robustly.
I think that's a brilliant point. I can't believe I just said that about something you said. I think that's a brilliant point.
I know.
You should take a bow. I think that's a really good point.
I will.
And I'm not even being sarcastic. I legitimately, I hadn't even thought about. I mean, I've thought about that in the past, but I hadn't even thought about that in the context of this discussion. How, if there's a conservation value and there's a potential to effectively have a bid on the value of this land to the American people.
That's capitalism, Dave. I love it.
What you've just done is describe capitalism 101, and it's hard for somebody to push back and say that's not fair, right? Somebody that's really pro-capitalism and wants the market to drive things, it's hard to come back and then say, no, you should exclude that voice.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's what we, again, if we're going to be capitalists, I think we should recognize that as everybody has to have a voice. We need to be fair with people. And if people don't want to step up, and I think that's part of the real discussion that's going to be painful too, is if somebody's saying, I want to conserve the entire world, I want 30 for 30, and I don't want to pay for any of it, right? That's not going to be workable.
No, it's going to be expensive.
I think everybody has to say, if you really care about that concept of having 30% of lands, whatever conservation means to you, if you're not willing to put your dollars and your sweat equity into whatever that means to you and willing to talk about it, then maybe you shouldn't have a seat at the table.
It's the same reason why, as the sporting community, like the hunting and angling community, we've been in such a strong position for so long, because we made the decision so many years ago, 90 years ago almost, right? 80 some years ago. We made the decision to say, we want skin in the game. We want this wildlife here. We want to be able to hunt and fish. We want our kids to be able to hunt and fish. And we're willing to invest our own money into making sure that we can do that.
You know what's bizarre? one of the new members of Congress actually ran on repealing the Pittman-Robertson tax.
I know.
Is that not the craziest thing? And the funny part is, like, it just literally shows.
Are you willing to say who that was?
No, you can. Yeah, but they're not from the West, and they think they're conservatives. But here's the thing: it's like, I mean, it just shows a total misunderstanding of who is actually behind that tax. Like,
right. We wanted it.
They're framing it up as if it's the firearms industry and sportsmen are mad about paying this tax.
Oh.
And like,
we asked for it.
No, we love it.
Yeah. Do we want to pay double? Probably not. But we like. I mean,
it's
good to have. It's good to have. It gives us skin in the game, and we can say with a straight face that we are the main drivers of conservation in this country.
Yeah, again, it's one of those things. It's like, gee, I've been on this rant before. But if you're going to be a policymaker, you have an obligation to be well informed. If you're too lazy to read about it, have a staffer who will read about it and write up some bullet points for you. Because wading into a conversation about something important and not knowing what in the hell you are talking about is not acceptable.
I can't imagine somebody out here running to say, we want to repeal Pittman-Robertson. Because think about the unintended consequences of that. Not to go down this rabbit hole, aside from all of the revenue that's not going back to the states, remember, one of the pieces of Pittman-Robertson was ensuring that in order to get that, the states had to have a system in place where the state legislatures could not pilfer from these game and fish funds, right? That one of the conditions of states receiving that Pittman-Robertson money is that the legislature isn't diverting license revenue.
It would literally be a body blow to the North American model of
rip it apart. It would
conservation.
gut it. Absolutely gut it.
Because then everybody would come up with all these new wacky ideas for, the Democratic, get rid of the idea of being able to go hunt wherever you want. It would be tragic.
Well, think about the states that we're talking about today: the New Mexicos, the Wyomings, the Colorados.
By the way, got to bring this up because we did talk about New Mexico. So before you get there, go ahead.
I'm going to lose my thought. I'm getting so old, I'm going to forget the thought. But we talk about the New Mexicos, the Colorados, the Wyomings of the world, right? And what this secretarial order or this executive order could do from an economic standpoint. And if you have a game and fish agency that's flush with money at a time when the rest of the state isn't, what do you think the legislature is naturally going to do? They're going to say wildlife or schools, wildlife or roads,
they'll go
wildlife or hospitals.
They'll go wildlife for schools. That's what they'll start doing in the program. And
right.
Your tag costs are going to go way up, and then it will become a rich man's game. It will be it's not a good idea.
You saying it would upend or rip the rug out from under the North American model of wildlife management, I think is spot on. It'd do more than that. It would destroy it.
Yeah.
It would destroy it.
Yeah.
And it would hurt wildlife immensely, not just in the long run, but over the short term.
Yeah.
It would be, the consequences would be dire, and I can't believe anybody would run on that platform.
Mm-hmm. Unless you didn't know what you were talking about.
And, my hope is that at some point this person was informed. Or actually, I'm hoping they never were informed.
No, they were never informed.
Oh my gosh!
No, it's
anyway. You had something you wanted to say about New Mexico, but
yeah. So New Mexico is one of those states that's big public lands state, big mineral development state. How would you like to be going up in front of the Senate for to have to explain if you wanted to be Secretary of Interior? How'd you like to have to defend this decision?
So I'm really glad you brought that up, because whether you agree or disagree with the order, and like I said, I'm reserving judgment on it. I think maybe you've kind of stepped in what your thoughts are, but the timing of this is weird. You have Representative Howland from New Mexico, who's been nominated to be Secretary of Interior, and she's going to have to go in front of the ENR committee, Environment and Natural Resource Committee, for confirmation sometime in who knows. Look, if I'm the Biden administration, I'm trying to beg that this confirmation get kicked around the road several months at this point.
She can't appreciate what she just got handed.
Because the timing of this is such that it's going to make her confirmation hearing just ugly. Just ugly. And of no fault of her own. Right? It's because I was talking to somebody today about this. I said, it doesn't matter if it's her, if it's Senator Udall, if it's Zinke or Bernhardt. If you're nominated and you're going in to have this confirmation hearing weeks after this executive order is issued, you're going to have a whole lot of Western senators are not going to be real happy. Yeah. And it's going to make the confirmation hearing really uncomfortable.
And how
because
do you like that it's...
The administration has laid down a marker, and the nominee is going to be expected to implement that directive, right?
And she's from that state.
She is from that. She's from New Mexico.
Yeah, and then you have some huge champions of wildlife who are, pragmatic, solid folks who are from New Mexico. Heinrich. Like it's tough. It's tough.
Well, but she's a pretty solid champion of wildlife. You look at her voting record in the House, and she supported the Pittman-Robertson Modernization Act. She supported the ACE Act. She supported the Great American Outdoors Act. She supported everything that sportsmen and women really were rallying behind and supporting in the last Congress. She was right there. She was right there with them. So she has a strong voice to support sportsmen's issues, and all these other ones do too. But it's just going to make it uncomfortable.
Hard. And the other thing,
really hard.
Yeah, and I think the thing that I come back to you started with this, and so I'd like to come full circle on it. You said, well, what does it really do? Does it really do anything at this point? Well, not for the next 4 years. A lot of these executive orders are mostly show and no go. They're mostly flash. They are thank yous to people who are in my camp and voted for me. But it can be argued that they don't really do a lot at the end of the day. And so the reason I bring that up is because, not only is she the Secretary of Interior and Heinrich's from New Mexico, but there's what gets lost on these folks who embrace kind of this is a good idea is that there are actual real world ramifications. Is your dog stinking again?
Oh my gosh. I'm sorry to interrupt. Your dog just destroyed the air around me. I can hardly breathe.
Murph, you gotta quit.
What do you feed this guy?
I think today he had a roast beef sandwich. Just kidding.
Man. Pot of beans and all sorts of stuff. Anyway, sorry to interrupt. I'm just gagging over here.
Good dog. So the issue is there are real world consequences. So these things look great for political reasons. It's nice to do something for your base. But here's when I talked about overstepping and when I talked about people in the middle becoming offended is the issue is there are people who have real jobs and this affects them. There are people who live in communities and this affects them. And yes, I know that a lot of the people who maybe voted that direction for the new administration don't live in those communities, and they don't live in New Mexico, and they don't live in Wyoming. But boy, it hurts those folks, and it alienates those folks. And you got to question if it's all show and no go, why you would do it, why you would choose to do it if at this time, what's the benefit at a time when your number one goal probably ought to be to try and consolidate your hold on those people in the middle. And instead, when you pass 30 executive orders that arguably a large number of them are very divisive in nature. It's, I realize not everybody might feel that way, but a lot of people are going to, throw up their hands and get angry. I mean, you question why.
At least 74 million people. Is the number?
Yeah, I don't know.
There's going to be no, and this is one. I don't know that it's an all show and no go. I mean, that's the other thing is, so many of these executive orders are the action arising from them is down the road somewhere. We don't know what it's going to look like yet, and so that's why I keep saying and I keep coming back to this that I don't think the sky is falling yet. I'm withholding judgment. We may come out of this stronger than we were going into it. And a lot of it's going to depend on the process that's put in place and the outreach that goes into actually implementing the executive order and other executive orders as well. Because, it landed badly out here, for sure. It landed badly out here. But there's still time to make it right. Like, there's still time to do the right outreach and have the right conversations and
I think you and I, though, know, interestingly enough, folks in D.C. who are making the calls on a lot of this stuff, they don't know how it lands out here. And part of making it right, what it's going to take, is it takes elected leaders, it takes leaders in the states who are willing to have, who are willing to have those tough conversations and sit down at the table with those people in D.C. who are pushing these agendas and are willing to say, like, look, A, B, and C from your idea, meh, but D, E, and F is a killer.
Yeah,
doesn't
but
work.
but that's the other thing I'd raise is so that side that you're talking about hasn't done any favors to this either, right? So it lands poorly, but then these folks throw just fuel on the fire with the hyper-partisan, hyperbolic rhetoric that comes out through the press releases and tweets and everything about the order.
It's the politics we live in.
And it's unfortunate because then if you read a lot of these, you think, oh my gosh, the sky is absolutely falling. Things are over. It's a calamity. The West is dead. Right? And then when you peel back all the layers of this onion, and you're left with a smaller onion, but you peel back all the layers and you realize, there's still so much unknown that you can't really say the sky has fallen. You can say it's starting to get a little cloudy.
Yeah.
Looks like a chance of rain. But that's not the approach that those folks did. Rather than saying, look, I have some heartburn about this. Here are what I fear could happen. Let's have a conversation about this. And that's kind of what you were saying is, let's have a conversation about this. That's not the messaging that's come out. And that's also a problem too. And that gets to the hyper-partisan world that we live in right now, and why it's so hard to cut through all the nonsense on both sides to find out what the actual facts and reality on the ground are. Like, who do you believe? Who do you trust? It's hard to find that right now. You
know what you can't trust? The Your Mountain
Your
Podcast.
Mountain Podcast.
Yep. That's the only place where you can get spin-free.
There's a lot of spin today.
100% accurate.
There's probably a lot of misinformation today.
Knowledge.
I don't know what we have as knowledge.
From the fountains of wisdom.
I'll give you that.
Yeah. Anyway.
But what I will say is what we were trying to do today is I do want to make here. Can I say this?
Go ahead.
Can I say this? I think we're not trying to lay down a marker on what we necessarily think. We were each trying to poke holes and play devil's advocate, and
we could each argue each other's points.
Absolutely. And so this was really an exploratory mission, trying to cover the nuances of this and give you, let you kind of understand what everybody might be thinking about the effects of this order. So you have, you can judge for yourself. We're not trying to push you necessarily in any one direction. The only thing I will say, from where I sit definitively, is I think it's too early to cast judgment yet, one way or the other, because we don't know what the end result of this order will look like. There will be an end result, and at some point there will be judgment cast, and we'll continue to follow this, and we will continue as things develop to provide as much of information and contours of this discussion as we can, so that everybody can hopefully make informed decisions for themselves. Is that fair enough to say?
Sounds good. Make sure you watch it. And that's the other part. We don't know what's going to happen, but everybody ought to understand the arguments so that if things do tilt a specific direction or whatever, don't, understand that. I was talking with somebody about this the other day, and I don't think maybe Dave, I'm just venting now. There's not a lot of, in fact, I know exactly what I'm going to say now. There's so much information out there these days that you really have to be careful about what you trust and who you get it from. And you have to be willing to ask yourself when you listen to people talk about something, if they really know what they're talking about, and to do a little homework yourself. Decide what you think about what they're saying. That's fine. Line up on one side or the other, but don't just take things at face value, because there are 5 gajillion podcasts out there in the world today.
850,000 or something like that active ones in the country.
And,
and you found us.
Just because you listen to something doesn't mean it's true. And I'll leave that,
Unless you're listening to us.
Which is usually right, unless we're talking about William Perry Penley.
Then we're just totally wrong.
Because we were totally wrong. But at least we were right on this. Even if it took us 2 more days on another podcast, at least we didn't misinform you on the leasing moratorium.
And the one thing that we're always willing to do, and I hope that's come across over the past few years that we've been doing this, is if we are wrong on something, call us out and we'll own it. Because we want to get the right information out there. Or if we're incomplete on something, call us out and we'll own it, and try and complete the discussion. I think we've done that several times. Obviously, we self-deprecate ourselves over our gaffe with the William Perry Pendley deal.
It's my favorite mistake.
It was such a big one.
Yeah, and he's such a comical character, and he's still an interior. We don't know where. Dave.
You think he is?
He's in a closet somewhere.
You think he is?
You bet.
I know
he's in a closet somewhere. He's probably got some snacks in there around him.
Now you're starting a conspiracy theory.
He's got a stapler.
Yeah. Now you're starting to, he's in there with Ryan Zinke somewhere.
Probably.
They're just embedded
I don't know what
somewhere.
I like that. Who knows? But I mean, where else would he be?
But who knows? I'm not going to buy into your conspiracy theory today. But I think what we're trying to say is, look, the one thing we hope we provide is good information, and we'll correct ourselves if we miss something. And that's one of the reasons why we're a couple days late with this podcast, is because what we had before, I think, was good information, but it was outdated within 24 hours. And so we didn't want to put that out there and have people listening to that. We wanted something more reflective of the current situation.
Thanks a lot for wasting our time.
And we didn't even because of this, we didn't even get to cover the other half of the podcast that we recorded.
No, we'll make a new podcast.
So we're going to have to make a new podcast. We don't even have to tell anybody what it's about, do we?
Nope, we're not going to.
Perfect. All right. Well, I got nothing else to add to you.
Nope.
All right. Thanks, everybody, for listening. If you have comments, questions, feedback, anything at all, you know how to get us. Your Mountain at itsyourmountain.com, or through our social media channels on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, at the handle at It's Your Mountain. Reminder, subscribe. How many times do you have to say it before people actually do it?
I don't know, but you should leave a really good review.
And leave a good review, and 5 stars. I think it's like you have to hear something several times before it commits to memory, so I was just trying to hit it all there at once. Anyway, I appreciate it. As always, we definitely appreciate it. I forgot to mention, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention we miss Mike today. I think I forgot to mention that. Mr. McGrady will be back with us soon. And actually, I'm going to leave it with a little joke, because you don't know this, but a mutual friend of ours, a listener of this podcast, I was on the phone with yesterday, and he was disappointed that Mike hasn't been on some of the episodes recently. And he said, Mike's an incredibly important voice because he provides the left flank of our discussion. And I hope Mike listens to this and hears that, because I laughed uncontrollably when he said that. that Mike's our left flank, and you're sitting there speechless.
I don't even know what to think.
Because if you know Mike, you know he is.
You don't. No one knows Mike, and that's the reality.
He's an enigma wrapped in another enigma.
No one who listens. Everybody just thinks that Mike is just this guy who, they don't know that he's really. Mike is Q.
He might be.
No.
Ponder that until next week.
There you go.
And while you're pondering that, remember that life is about experiences. So go have one.